Elon, why? Like, why get involved? You've got Tesla, right? You got the company, you got SpaceX, you've got Cyberlink, you got all these different things. You got, what's the one now with the chip that's in the head, which I think is fascinating.
Neuralink.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like, super smart guy. But what's in it for you? You know what I mean? Like that's I think the outsider is just saying like, Elon, why? You want to be more famous? You're already famous enough. You already are the richest man in the world. Like, why? Like, what's the big reason?
So honestly, and this is where we get a little potentially controversial, because it's going to sound like an endorsement of Elon. Not necessarily, right? I think he's a genius. Whether you like him or not that's totally irrelevant, right? He's a once in a lifetime talent, and he does a lot of things, and he does a lot of things well. I think it really comes down to that lawsuit that happened where they said, well, you have to do this. He goes, but I literally can't, right? And so one of the things that he is passionate about is making humans a multiplanetary species, right? He really thinks we have to get off of Earth and colonize somewhere like Mars. How do you do that if it takes longer for a group of people to sit in a room and go, yeah, you can launch that rocket because it's almost exactly the same as the last rocket that you launched, except it's a little bit bigger. If it takes 6 months to do that and it takes 3 months to build the rocket, then we are doing something wrong in terms of the efficiency here. And it's not just a benefit to Elon and to SpaceX and to Tesla and to Neuralink to be able to streamline that process. It's a benefit to anybody in the business world. It's a benefit to innovation to not have all of those hoops to jump through. The balance that you have to then make is, okay, how do we make sure that we do this in a way that's logical, right? Like, I don't know how the entire rest of the world sends people how much they owe in taxes instead of you having to tell the government how much you owe. And then if you get it wrong, you go to jail. Like, that seems a little weird to me, right? And so if we can rethink how we're doing these things and encourage innovation, that I think is what he's actually passionate about here. And that I think is the reason he's doing it. It's a little bit that he's kind of butthurt that the previous administration came after him. And also because he's doing all of these different things, he sees the stupidity and the redundancy. And he's saying, look, we need to do something about this because this is going to strangle small and medium-sized businesses. You're never going to be, I have SpaceX now. Cool. I have 100 people who do nothing but talk to the EPA, the FDA, the 100 organizations that need to get in a room to say, yes, you can press that button. You don't. How do we make sure that the next group of innovators, how the next generation's Elon Musk is able to start to create some of those cool things? That seems to be the route that they're going with this. And to me, that makes sense. Yes, there is some personal benefit to this, in terms of it would make his life easier with SpaceX. It would make his life easier with Tesla. It would make his life easier with Neuralink, right? Because there's a lot of regulation in terms of, I don't know, putting things in people's bodies, and maybe there should be some regulation there, right? But I think really what he's looking at is, how can we set this up so that the next time somebody wants to do something that's new, innovative, and different, they can do it? And the example he used recently was high-speed rail. Most of the rest of the world has high-speed rail. The US doesn't have a high-speed rail system. And the excuse that you always hear is, well, that's because Americans prefer to jump on an airplane and spend 6 hours in the air to go from LA to New York or from New York to LA. And the real answer is, it comes down to the regulation and the regulatory bodies who have essentially said, you can't build new railroads in the US, high speed or not. Right? Because you have to worry about every single thing. There's 15 different departments involved, and maybe they shouldn't be. Maybe they do have a legitimate role. Maybe, we should make sure that we're not spilling things into water and all of those kinds of things. But also, there needs to be some common sense and a little bit of the ability to move forward. And what we have now is a little bit of a stranglehold, at least in his mind. And so the proposal is to have that Department of Government Efficiency, right? He purposely went after the most Orwellian sounding name possible. And also, in typical Elon fashion, made it an internet meme to say, hey, Doge, right? Like the Shiba Inu. And he's saying, look, this is something that needs to happen. I'd love to help with it if you'll have me. If not, let's figure out a way to get it in. And I don't know anyone that can honestly sit here and say that the government is 100% efficient. No one's business is 100% efficient. You can't tell me there's not at least 10 people somewhere in the federal government that are doing not the meeting with the Bobs, but the who's the other guy from Office Space, the guy that they fire and then just keep paying, Milton.
Yeah, I don't know.
Right? They keep he's the guy that ends up on the beach with all the money at the end. They fire him, but no one told him that they fired him, and then they eventually just stop issuing him paychecks. Right? But you can't tell me there's not 10 people in a basement somewhere that haven't actually done anything, because it happens in Silicon Valley. It happens in every business. So that's essentially what he's talking about in terms of cutting regulation, trying to figure out a way to streamline this to make it easier for businesses to do business, to encourage innovation.
Yeah. I think the big question comes down. I mean, everyone is like, not everyone, but a lot of people are just like, oh, Elon wants to do it because he's going to get all these tax cuts. Maybe, but I don't think that's his biggest motivation. I think, like you said, Chris, a lot of it is control. Like, why did he buy Twitter? It wasn't necessarily because he wanted that so he can make a whole bunch more money. He wanted it more or less because he felt like, free speech was being taken away, kind of thing. At least that's how I see it from the outside. Do I agree with everything that Elon does? Absolutely not. I think he's weird, but in like a very smart way, where he's just like, he has really, really crazy stuff that, like, an inventor, right? It's like, you look at an inventor, you're like, why didn't I think of that? But you're like, even if I thought about it, I couldn't make it come to life. You know what I mean? So it's like, there are people, I believe, that are here, that are there to push that. Look at Microsoft, Bill Gates, and Apple, and you see all of these different companies and these people that have really pushed innovation. He's definitely pushing innovation. So we can, some can like him, not like him, whatever. But like you said, Chris, it's like, if you're pushing the boundaries, or you're pushing like what you think, it's like you said about the tariffs. It's like, okay, if you start out at 25,000%, but then you go, all right, we'll settle on 5%. You got a lot higher than you would have if you started at 5%. So to me, he's always pushing the limits of what could be or can be done. Even like to pollinate on Mars, like, how crazy does that sound? Like, how crazy, right?
It sounds crazy, but it also doesn't. Because if you remember when you were growing up, that was just going to happen, right? Like, that was the next, we went to the moon. What's the next logical step? And then nothing happened. And I think regardless of your personal feelings on Musk, at least the public messaging here, right? Whether it's his secret shadow agenda is just to get more tax cuts for him, which honestly, I don't really think he actually cares about money that much at this point, right? It must be nice to have several $100 billion and just be at a point where you're just like, right? A small tax cut, not really going to affect his life all that much. But if you at least listen to the messaging, I think we can mostly get behind that to say, look, it shouldn't cost you a couple $100 million to try something new. Yeah. It shouldn't take you longer to have a group of people from random agencies in the US government to figure out whether you can push the button than it does to literally build a rocket that no one has ever built before. Right? And so I think we need to have some room for testing. And that I think is something most people, at least in the US, can get behind, which is that American innovative spirit, right? If you look back over the course of history, the things that have changed the American economy, the American dream the most, always come from one of those things that really pushes the boundaries. And we happen to have seen a few of those things come from somebody like an Elon Musk. But even if we think about like the original Ford and the assembly line and some of those kinds of things, could you imagine if it took Ford, I don't know, 10 years and $900,000 to get the approval to build an assembly line instead of having everybody doing everything all the time? Like, that's what we need to get back to. And whether the answer is cutting more or changing regulation, that's what we need to figure out. And I don't think anyone can fairly say that the government is 100% efficient. If you've ever been to the DMV, I challenge you to get back to me on that. Speaking of which, Scott, and like looking at things that are innovation, this is kind of a tangent, but when I first moved to Nevada, so back in like 2012, I think it was 2012, 2013, something like that, I had never been in a state where you could not go into the DMV to get a license renewal or to do some certain things. One of the things Nevada was doing was they had ATMs in grocery stores where you could even get like your picture taken by the ATM camera and update your driver's license, right? Wow. You didn't have to go to the DMV to do that. If those are the things that we're looking at in terms of efficiency, then we need to look at all 50 states. We need to look at other countries and say, how are they doing that? And is there a way that we can do this that's not as obtrusive to businesses, that's not as obtrusive to people's everyday lives? And if we can cut that, then you can save a little bit of money, potentially pay some less, some fewer taxes, and then go on from there. Seems good on paper. We'll see how the results shake out, but at least the intentions that are publicly stated sound like they have their heart in the right place.